Welcome to Chris.
Oh,
Chris, welcome. I can hear you. Yeah, welcome
yes,
to the
excellent,
Chris and
excellent.
Arash show. We are live, and we're excited to have our program today. Welcome to the show, Chris. How are you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, for sure. Well, this is our show,
Oh,
and we're
yeah.
going to talk about. We're both co-hosts here, and
Oh,
we're
yeah.
going to talk about relationships today.
Great.
How do you feel about that?
I feel great. I got a bunch of questions for you.
Oh, okay. I got a bunch of questions for you too. So just to explain what's kind of gonna happen here, I will bring in my own experiences and knowledge about relationships. I've been married for 15 years and 17 years in the same relationship. And Chris has a lot of experience in terms of online dating, which I have lots of questions about. So it's going to be quite a bit of fun.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get started here. Who
Oh,
wants to
and
go
maybe I should
first?
just, and if I could just say a few
Sorry,
words
let's
that,
introduce you first, right?
yeah,
So
that's right. So,
Chris is here. Yeah.
as you mentioned, I, I think the longest relationship I was in was 7 years, and I was married for some of those. And then I was in a relationship for maybe 4, and then another one for 3. But for sort of most of my adult life, I've been single and dating where relationships would last. Maybe where relationships isn't the right word. The very popular, the trendy word these days is situationship.
Oh, that's the first time I'm hearing that. But all right,
It's
situation.
like wasn't really a full relationship, and they tend to go like 3-4 months and then flame out very quickly. Like lots of excitement at the beginning, and then it's sort of like, well, what are we doing? And then it's over. So that, and then just a lot of times in between of just not really dating and just being on my own and being fine with that. And so, yeah, they're very different experiences.
So how many years, I would think years now, of experience have you had with online dating?
Roughly over 10, probably closer to 15 years on and off here and there. And I did it. I used to live in Japan. I lived there for 8.5 years, and I was married for 6 of them. And then I had 2 years where I was very much a bachelor, sort of making up for lost time. And so that's sort of what I kind of jumped into online dating in a foreign country. And so that was also a kind of a different experience than it is when you do it in your own culture.
Okay, yeah.
So
So you have cross-cultural experiences of online dating, which is really amazing.
Say that again.
So you have cross-cultural online dating experiences.
Right.
That's amazing. That's really cool. All right, so yeah, let's get started. Maybe you can ask me some questions, and
Yeah.
I can talk about my own experience of relationships. Again, my view is kind of limited. Of course, I haven't had much of online dating experience. I did have one years ago before I met my wife. So and that was pleasant, but that was about it. So it's just one tiny experience, but I can talk about the relationships. The relationship experience, it's singular, that I've had over the years. Yeah. So let's go ahead.
Here's my first question for you. What makes a successful long-term relationship?
What makes it successful? I think if one of the main things is to be happy. Like that you feel that you are satisfied in your relationship. I mean, it's not that every day needs to be a happy day, but that you feel that you are complementing each other in many ways, and you feel there is an element of trust there between the two of you. I kind of, again, for me, I think a relationship, you really need also commitment and trust. And those are things that I think are vital blocks. I mean, if people say, well, you might have a relationship without commitment, to me, that would not be an intimate relationship, a close relationship, how I would perceive it. And again, with one person in this case.
Right. Interesting. So trust, commitment. I guess I was thinking, I thought you were going to say communication.
Communication, absolutely, it's there, and I think that goes hand in hand with the trust. So they're able to communicate with each other, and that is tough. The communicate actually, well, just as a general rule, it takes work to make a relationship work, and
Right.
so it is that constant communication, the effort there, and miscommunication that does happen, and try to clear that, and try to have the occasional discord there, but then try to repair those things, try to make compromises. So it's a mix of various things. And one thing I like to see in terms of relationship, I like to see it as a Venn diagram, like a successful relationship. Maybe to come back to the question you asked me at the beginning, I think a successful relationship is you have a Venn diagram, and so I hope everybody's familiar with that. And so there is there should be quite a bit of overlap, not minimal. I think quite a bit of overlap where things you agree on, things you both enjoy, activities and so on. But there should be also the space where you can be clearly yourself that's separate. So when I do podcasting and my wife doesn't do podcasting, I'm okay with that, right? It doesn't mean that we have to be identical. And that is actually a bit scary if that happens, right? So you want to have your own space as well, but the main part should be the parts that you do together. So if you don't have any interest in common, I don't think that will work. That wouldn't be a successful relationship. The chances are very low it could be.
Yeah, right. You need some glue there, right? Like some kind of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I guess just on that same topic, I just feel like that communication piece is a real dividing line. Like I think that in my relationships, I've had relationships where, for the most part, I feel like communication, it was sort of, we'll talk about things up to a point, but it's not always appropriate to talk about everything. And then I've had relationships where it was like, no, we're going to be 100%, on things, like as they come up, and we're going to be transparent about things. And that actually, ultimately, as I'm saying this, as the words coming out of my mouth, I actually now realize I've experienced the far extreme of that, which ultimately destroyed the relationship, where it's like there is a sense of like time and place, like we're not just, sometimes you don't have to like address everything and in the moment as it happens. But for the most part, I would say a lot of the relationships I was in, there wasn't enough communication, and that's what kind of messed things up. And there was always a feeling of like, we talk about things up to a limit, but then it wasn't, it's like, now we're going too far. Like now we're delving too deeply into this, and we don't have the patience, and we don't have the time. And the purpose of a couple is to have some fun, get together. Don't bring the mood down with yet another long deep dive into what happened and analyze whatever.
I think there could also be too much communication, right? It's just having that balance too. But I think if it depends also on the level of the relationship. But once you've gone, you are deciding that it is going to be a long-term relationship, it is committed, that is the plan. I think you should be quite authentic, and basically nothing should be off limits. If there's anything that you say, I don't feel comfortable talking about that, who are you going to talk about those things, right? So it has to be that person. There's certain things that we don't share with partners and so on, that's fine. But if it's concerning the relationship, I think there should be that openness. And you should be able to have uncomfortable, difficult discussions and be willing to change or reach compromises and so on. I think that give and take is hugely important too.
Yeah, and I guess I feel like that's a part of this where, in order to have some of those conversations, you sort of have to be very willing to be very vulnerable,
Yes,
and to be able
absolutely.
to say, this is how I'm feeling, and and you might have to go to some uncomfortable territory. And I think a lot of people are afraid of that. They're afraid of it for two reasons. I think one of them is that's a conversation that may abruptly end your relationship, right? Like there's maybe things you're like, oh, let's just pretend everything's fine.
Well, I wouldn't do it on the first date, obviously, but again, that is something that, yes, what do you want from a relationship, or is it a situationship or relationship, and what do you want? And I think, well, even from the beginning, both people need to be open to that. So there is no misunderstanding, or, oh, I thought we're going to get married, and you say, no, that was just a fling, right? So it's that is, I think, important to be on the same page. And then, yes, you do want to take it step by step, but that's the only place that you can be fully vulnerable, because I think you can't do it in front of your boss. Yeah, you don't want to go and say, I'm vulnerable now, and
No, no.
cry. I mean, it's okay.
No,
I wouldn't have a
specifically,
problem with
yeah,
that.
like romantic,
but but
relationships.
this is, I think, a relationship is really where you should be yourself, your true self, and the other person as well. And if you're playing a role, or the other person is playing, or both of you are playing roles, then you're not having an authentic relationship.
Right. And I think the key part of that is, when you talk about commitment, to me, commitment is about acceptance, like accepting the other person and a willingness to sort of accept that they're going to accept you as you are. So you should be fine to say whatever is, whatever you're feeling should be fine to share with them. Without feeling like, oh, it's very conditional here, and you only like me if I'm being funny and I'm really being on. But if I drone on a little bit too long about my feelings, then this is boring, screw this. And I've been in those relationships where it felt that way, where it's like I just instinctively wouldn't share too much because I sensed that there was a let's keep it light kind of feeling. And it wasn't even necessarily about me or the relationship, but it's that person's general life approach, kind of keep it light. Like let's not look too deeply into ourselves or into what life's about. That's just boring, or that's a little too scary. So just philosophical questions, deep thoughts, maybe too nerdy, whatever.
And that's the Venn diagram too. You say, okay, you know what? There's just tiny bit of overlap, and I don't think it'll work out. And what they experience, if they experience happiness, it would be on a very superficial level, because in order to have deep, lasting happiness, you do have to go deep into it, I think. And so there won't be much of a connection, which is fine. But unless you want something more, then the deeper connection will be by showing yourself the way you are, and the other person, like you're saying, accepting you as you are. One thing I see is the saver syndrome. That's where the person is basically taking on a challenge and say, okay, this person is an alcoholic, and I'm going to help this person to overcome it, and they're going to change. And in reality, it's like, you can't really change people that much. You can, but to a certain degree, and that shouldn't be the challenge of the relationship. It's you, again, accept them, but then slowly you can work on changing things within the relationship, right? But not having as your mission, I'm gonna change this person. I'm gonna change. This is a person who is gay, and I'm gonna make them heterosexual. That kind of thing. It's just really thwarted, and that some people operate in that way, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think that there's a key difference between sort of demanding change for its own sake and growth. Where
exactly.
And I think like I've been in relationships where I have made changes, sort of in the relationship, and some of those changes were really because of personal growth, because the other person, the relationship, brought something out in me or illuminated something that needed attention, and it was humbling, but it did kind of cause me to grow. And then there was other times that I made changes that was essentially editing myself, and those were negative, and that's trying to change for someone just to please them, obviously is not growth, right?
Exactly.
So there's a big difference between those two. But then just to touch on the other side of it, because again, it's a kind of a fresh experience, that sort of the communicating too much. I think one of the key, regardless of how being honest and communication should be very transparent, but I think there, for me anyway, one of the things I value most in other people is just consideration. Like I just feel like it's a human value that's like, if you have compassion, then you should also be considerate. So it's like, and so communication and a commitment to transparency is not a license to just say whatever the hell you're thinking.
Yeah.
And because it's like, we are vulnerable, we are putting ourselves in a position of trust. And when you're in a relationship and you're in a position of vulnerability, which you kind of have to be for it to go forward, you're kind of trusting that the other person is going to treat you with some consideration, with some care, right? Like it's like, and so it's like, and so I do think that there needs still to be reflection, like it shouldn't just be like blurting out whatever. It should be like, okay, there's something I want to share with you, but it's something that's it could be hurtful to you. So let me think about how I can make this not hurtful or hurtful less, right?
We see it in the world today, especially now, the distortion, the misunderstanding of what freedom is, freedom of expression is, and so on. And I think, yes, it's and the opposite idea is where you think like marriage, no, that's a prison, you're trapped. And so it's just how you perceive it. But freedom of expression does not mean that you can say whatever you want, right? Or
Right.
freedom,
That's good.
whatever you want to do. So if you are in a relationship, there are certain rules, and that kind of rules of etiquette. It's kind of like you're saying, consideration, and taking the other person's point of view into consideration, and compromise and all that. And if you can't have that, I don't think you can be in an intimate and successful relationship, because it comes with it. And it's not a lack of freedom there. It just, you do have there's no such thing as unconditional situations. And even the term unconditional love, I think it's, for us humans, it's kind of misguided. There are, of course, conditions. We do have certain conditions, even with our children. But again, in a relationship, much more so. And the condition might be, you will be with me and not with other people. Or again, if the conditions are more flexible, then okay, you have your own conditions there. But that needs to be clear, and both need to agree on that. I think that's hugely important.
Yeah.
But one thing I'd like to know, how, as in terms of online dating, I think it's kind of a gamble. I mean, you go through all the information that you see and you get an impression, but then you go on that first date. So how do you know the person is trustworthy? And then my follow-up question would be then, maybe a bit later, is what are some red flags to watch out for? Maybe you want to combine both questions here.
Well, I would say these days there's a growing popularity of what they call the zero date. So not the first date, but a kind of pre-date. And especially during in these pandemic times, that may be a quick, either a phone call or a Zoom chat, and then go from there. So you don't actually have to go out and go on or maybe that first coffee date is a little bit like that too, but at least you don't have to waste your time going out. Yeah. You have, and it's happened where I have my little half-hour chat, close Zoom. It's like we both know we're never going to talk to each other again, and you're just at home. You're just like, that was no problem. But
I think it eliminates surprises there, because my old perception of it, again, was you go on a date and then you find out the person looks nothing like the profile picture, right? Yeah. So I guess, I mean, with Zoom, you can still kind of play around and use filters so on, I think.
I would say Zoom's pretty good for that, because I've had a lot of people put up pictures that are 10 years old or something.
Yeah.
I had a situation like that a little while ago, and we're a little bit of texting, oh, let's have a chat on Zoom, and then the person who appeared in the camera was barely recognizable as being the same person in the pictures, and it was clear that was like an old picture. Okay. And again, that was really useful information to have in that little Zoom chat. And yeah, for me, that was like, okay, and that's as far as we're going here, as opposed to, I've met lots of people in coffee shops and having to go to that coffee shop. And then it's like that shock of like somebody coming in, not looking like their picture is somehow it's way worse when it's in person, and and then for me, I've got to change this rule for myself. But in the past, I had this ridiculous rule that regardless, I would always give people time. like, and I give them a lot of time. I give them like 90 minutes. So, it's like,
That's
even
a
though
lot of time. That's
I
a
know
lot of
it's too
time.
much, but we're both teachers, right? And for me,
Mhm.
like a basic conversation class, especially when I lived in Japan, was 90 minutes. And I sort of was like, I can do 90 minutes with anybody. And I'm just going to give them that. And part of it is that some people, especially when people lie, it's like, I'm angry, but I'm also compassionate. Like, I've had one of the big ones is I've had dates with people who on they've had like a face picture but not a body picture, and they've just indicated they're sort of a normal weight or whatever, and they're quite overweight, and I don't judge them for that. That's that's just the way we are all made or whatever. But it's dishonest to kind of misrepresent yourself. But in the same time, I just feel for them because I feel like they know what's going to happen, and they're just taking that chance that maybe they're like, if you give me a chance, you'll see how charming I am. You'll see I'm not, you know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
if we
Yeah,
have
yeah.
a connection or something. So
I
in that case, I give them the time because I feel like this is so hard for them. And I know they tell me stories where people don't give them the time, where literally people walk in, go look at them and go, hell no, and walk right out.
Well, I mean, as a teacher, and I teach foreign languages, and so when the first question in French, I ask them, "What's your name?" and there is no response, I know that the whole interview and the whole test will not go well. The oral exam will not go well. But yes, I don't want them to feel bad. It's like just after the first question that you know what, we're done. So I do follow up, but then I also feel bad because it's like, putting them in a situation, if they can't answer the first question, which is the most basic one, they will not answer the other ones either. So I think finding that balance of like, again, I think hour and a half is too much there, but it's like, okay, well, we've got our 10 minutes. That was wonderful. And have a great life, and good luck elsewhere, I
Well,
think.
I mean, again, I think 10 minutes seems short. I would go a half hour. Let's say half
Okay.
hour, because you can still
Generous, you're
just
generous. Yeah.
one of the things that I started doing is when I would go on these dates, I stopped thinking of them as dates. Like, don't think of
Mhm.
it like
I like
the
that.
only value of this meeting is the assessment of whether this person is
Mhm.
dateable or
Mhm.
not.
Mhm.
So an example was last summer, somebody just chatting with somebody online, sort of first contact chatting, and she was just like, want to meet right away. And I was like, all right, I'm up for the challenge. And she's like, where are you? I'm like, I live in Kits, so whatever. And I said, I'll meet you at Kits Beach. And she was like, okay, I'm in the car. I'm actually just going to come over. So, we had really no background, whatever, just pictures and a few lines of text. And so we sat on the bench and we kind of watched the sunset. And I think we immediately knew that we weren't like couple material, but we had a lovely chat. Like, we just had this really nice conversation and watched the sunset. And she was like a maternity nurse. And so just
Mm.
every day it's just babies being born. That's just her life. And that's so like completely outside of my experience, right? I don't have children. Like, I don't think of babies and children even exist most of the time. And so she, but we sort of had this chat. It was very friendly. We were interested in each other, in the conversation. And I was like, not bad for a Tuesday evening. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
and
Exactly.
and then she sent me a lovely note, sort of saying like, I could imagine we could have all kinds of great conversations. And you see, you're a wonderful man, but I think we both know that blah blah blah. And I was like, that was a super civilized way of doing things,
Mhm.
and I didn't regret it. I wasn't like, oh, I wasted my time or whatever. I was more like, oh, that's cool. I met this interesting person, and I'll never see them again. So.
Mhm. Yeah, and I love that point. It's like starting off as friendship, and that takes away all the edge of it, the nervousness, and then you can take it from there. It's like, no, there is more to it, or no, I don't think there is. But again, you might have just a new friend over. So it's like,
Yeah,
I think that is important. Yes, definitely.
yeah.
What about if you get the first impression? If it's not good, do you give that person? If you think there might be something there, do you give them a second chance in
Yeah,
terms of online
I
dating?
do, and I have, and like I'll go, and it's happened where I'll go on a first date, and there are definitely good things about it, and I'm like, And they'll always be like, yeah, let's try this one more time. And often it's just, and I'll go on that second date and it fizzles, but but I'm glad that I gave it that shot, you know, like sometimes it's just catching somebody in a different mood or something like that, you know. It'll just be sort of seeing that, or you know, just it worked for a second and then it's kind of you know, nope. Or you learn, or more likely just learn a little bit more about them, you know, like where you sort of go, oh, you have, like I remember, you know, somebody who seemed interesting and we had this great first date, and then the second day was like we couldn't go beyond those topics. Like the communication was kind of like wearing thin, and I was like, well, we aren't connecting as much as it seemed last time. But you know, to be honest, I think especially as we get older, one of the biggest determiners of all of this is just straight up desire. Like it's kind of, I mean, I wish it wasn't so, and you know, and it's like, it's not, we shouldn't all be chasing some kind of high, right, of infatuation or whatever, especially when that's not going to be so much a factor as we get older. But in the same time, and I think this is this was a sort of a question I was going to ask you, what you thought about. Is like, you know, we all kind of want and need for desire and attraction to be part of the recipe. You know, like we're not all so pure that you are connecting purely on a mental or emotional level. And knowing that I've been in a relationship long enough to know that desire comes and goes and you kind of work with it. But, you know, I think that's when you're in it, you know, like, but it's sort of, so, you know, it's always sort of like, how much is enough, you know, and is sort of a question sometimes. And I think that's a big determiner where I've been at with people is between the first and second date, what happens is, oh, there's a spark, there's a bit of chemistry. And then that chemistry kind of just fizzles out in the second time, where it's like, oh, I'm not actually that attracted to them. And I know it's the same way with me. Like and then that when they're responding to me, and the other one that is a little bit sad for the human race, especially during COVID, I sometimes had really long text communication with people, and it was great. They were articulate, they were intelligent, they were funny, and it was, you know, and we just weren't switching to any kind of voice or video. And we were just getting really, really into like talking about all of this really intense stuff. And then finally I'd be, hey, let's have a Zoom chat. And I saw their pictures, so I should have known, but I was still like, you know, maybe. And then when I saw the Zoom, I was like, yeah, no, this is just like, no way. And then of course it just all dies there, you know, like, because it's so hard to pivot to friendship at that point. I mean, some people could probably do it because you're kind of focused on dating, but it's kind of like, and it's just like, oh, really? All of that excitement and all that sort of real connection. But if there isn't that sort of spark of actual desire, yeah, I don't really care. Bye.
Well, it depends again, but I think it's like when we look at like in North America, and marriages are based on passion, on love, whereas in many other cultures they have arranged marriages. And some of those marriages actually turn out to be okay, even though there is none of that. There is not, the desire probably is not in there, I think, when parents choose who you should marry. And I don't agree with that personally, but there are success stories there, that relationships that do work. So I think for me, myself, if there's like probably a lot of passion there at the beginning, it will fizzle out. I think that's kind of guaranteed. So if that's your main decision there, I don't think that would necessarily work. And so when I see it like relationships, one way of approaching it, which is not the most romantic way of doing it, is like a cost benefit analysis of pros and cons and looking at it. But we're not talking about necessarily just money. It could be, but it's also the time that we invest in it, the effort that we put into the relationship. And if you feel that, apart from the desire and everything else, if you feel that you're basically wasting your time, you're basically wasting your energy, I don't think that will work. And we see that with people who marry their high school sweethearts, and it might work out, but in many cases, it doesn't. But then you kind of like stick it out. It's like, well, I'm stuck, right? Nothing I can do, or we have kids, and what can you do? So I think it's really important to find that out, and so it's not just purely one thing, the passion, but it's like a mix of other things as well, and a rational way, which again sounds not romantic, but I think it is important of seeing it in a clear way. Is this going anywhere? Is there potential here or not? Right? And to make that decision not when you're 10, 15 years in a relationship, but really from the get-go, kind of try to see that. What do you think? What's your opinion on this?
I mean, it's a really interesting question because I feel like, you know, I'll be very honest and say I struggle with this, and I think a lot of people do in the dating world because, I mean, part of it, there's a lot of choice out there, right? Like, you know, or at least the illusion of choice, you know, whereas, and so on one hand, you know, and I actually, I saw a therapist for a while who's really, really smart on this. And he mentioned that actual desire is not a predictor of long-term success in a relationship. And I'm going to be honest. And I was like, what? You know, kind of blew my mind. And I was like, what? And I was like, of course it isn't. Yes. Right. You can't make it on that. So although that is the case, yeah, I just still feel like a lot of sort of the dating world, I mean, maybe not everyone, but there is that, I guess it is a feeling like there should be a spark, right?
Oh yeah.
And there should be that connection. But how much of that needs to be kind of raw physical desire is maybe the question. Because here's maybe the mistake that I've made in my life, and maybe why you're in a long-term successful marriage and I'm not, is when I would date someone and there would be some initial excitement, attraction, whatever, when that physical desire would fade, I would be like, well, then I guess they should just be my friend. You know, like then the physical part of the relationship is going to kind of fall away, you know, because it's harder to maintain that, you know, like if there isn't a lot of sexual desire, it's probably not going to be a lot of sex, basically.
But like you're saying, it comes and goes. So I wouldn't be too worried if it's like, okay, right now I don't have it, but tomorrow I will, you know? So
Yeah.
it's kind of like it's kind of the ebb and flow there that we get. And I think it's like also like for me, trusting your intuition and saying, I have a feeling that this is the right connection. There's a spark there, like you're saying, and be willing to take that leap, right? Once you have the intuition, that not based on desire or passion only, but also like this feels right.
Oh
And
yeah,
then
absolutely.
kind of also checking it and saying along the way, yeah, does this feel right, and so on. And then at some point, it just becomes kind of more automatic. One of the problems is, I think it's we're looking for the perfect person, and we're looking for the perfect relationship. And so a lot of people get like exasperated. It's like, oh, there's these things I wanted in a relationship I didn't get, and now I'm going to look for somebody else. Maybe they will have it, or you leave this person for another person because it will be better, and it might be better for a while in your perception, but then again, people are showing the best faces, they're putting the best foot forward also in terms of dating. And same as a job interview, yeah, you don't go and say, okay, well, I got the following weaknesses, and then slowly when those weaknesses creep in, then we get scared and we say, no, maybe I can find somebody better, maybe I can improve on the person I have and find somebody who has all the qualities I want. And that is going to fail in most cases, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that it should be based on solely on you know, desire and all, but I think we just sometimes, what am I trying to say? Like it's sometimes I think we're in a difficult place where we're like, feeling it, not feeling it. Do I keep going? Do I try? Like I think it's a constant negotiation in our own minds, and you know, I think it's just to me, it just feels, in a way, it's simple on a human basis, maybe. but it's a different, and whenever people sort of try, or even myself try to quantify it, it kind of slips away from me, where it's
Yeah.
kind of like, yeah, it was, because again, it's like when I look back, it's like, but I don't think I could have gone on. You know what I mean? Like I couldn't have simply said, no, I'm not really feeling with this person, but I'm just gonna keep on with them. It was just like,
Hmm.
no. Anyway, that's enough for that.
Hmm.
Let me ask you something
Sure.
here. Um, so, what do you think? What is your take on polyamory? And let me just preface this by saying, like, I I think polyamory is an interesting experiment that people do, right? And I know a few people who are, at least sort of heard about other people who have been into that, and like, I guess in principle I respect people who say that it's working for them, and so I'm not trying to take that away from them. I'm saying it might potentially work for some. I'm not going to say it doesn't work ever, but I think it's like kind of runs counter. I could be wrong, but it seems to run counter to something very human in my opinion.
I think just actually a few days ago, I told my wife that I don't understand how people have polygamy, how they can have more than one wife. So
Yeah,
and for me again, if we see it in that kind of perspective of like an investment of time and effort and so on, and the communication and the presence, there's only limited time that we have. So, and I think if you try to separate it among like various other people, you will not have one complete relationship. It's just like bits and pieces. So I don't think that is actually physically, emotionally possible to have that, right? So that's why it just to me would make sense to be just in one relationship and getting to know that person. Otherwise, you would also get confused. I'm impressed with people who have various kids. And I'm thinking, how do you separate them? How do you know each of the names and what you said to this person and this person? I mean, I know they love them all. I don't doubt that. But I think like in terms of like really like close relationship with your child, I can understand two, stretching it to three, but that's where I would draw the line. And it's like you won't be able to be present for all of them in the same way than you would be for one or two. So the same, I think, would be in relationships. So
yeah,
it's possible, yes, but it won't give you that deeper joy. And I think one of the fears that many people have, and it might be a driving force there, it's just FOMO, the fear of missing out. And it's like, okay, I now I'm going to be with this person. Maybe this will be better with this person. And it's like at some point I say, you know what? Make up your choice. You go to a restaurant, you pick a meal. If you like it, that's going to be fine and satisfying. But it's like having bits and pieces from the whole menu. I don't think that will be satisfying. But again, this is my personal view here.
yeah. I mean, I think the time thing is a big one where it's like, um, I I don't know how they schedule it, and it's just in terms of,
Exactly. Yes.
and it's just there's only so many hours in the day, and when I am in a relationship, I find it hard to be as present as I want to be in that relationship. Given the demands of a job, but also of just being on some alone time. And so I, again, full all 100% respect to people for whom it does work, and I'm not trying to take that away. But I do know of a case of somebody who was in a poly relationship with two women and then three, and I just sensed like somebody who didn't want to be alone, like ever,
Mm-hmm.
like not for
Mm-hmm.
5 minutes, and it was a way of plugging every hole, like every gap,
Yeah.
and saying, I don't, I, I just, to me, life is lived with other people, and I guess for me, and this is kind of lead me to a next other question, but you know, the relationships with other people only work if you have a really solid relationship with yourself first. And,
Oh, yeah.
and to
That's
have
right.
that relationship with yourself, you're going to need to spend some time alone. And I think it's Robin Sharma who says, like, what does he say? He says, when you're in solitude, very poetic, he says, you hear the whispers of your higher self, and it's like that is that higher self that doesn't always get expression in a relationship with other people, because that's between you and you. Like that's no one
Yeah.
else is going to have that perspective. And so if your life is just people all day, it's like, when do you stop and reconnect with yourself?
That's absolutely. I think that's vital, and that is probably the issue with many failed relationships. Because if you don't find yourself, if you don't know what you want, how can you tell the other person what you want from them, right? So, and that creates all these layers of misunderstandings, of anxiety, and so on. And yes, absolutely. But it is hard to do that. It is hard to really connect with yourself, and sometimes you connect with yourself through the other person by exploring things that you didn't think you had. And for me, the relationship is always this like third entity between you that is there. And I think it's just like basically like a yeah, a third entity that grows and becomes something else. And
Yeah.
then that's the combination of you two. Now, if you put other people in there, it just becomes too crowded, I think. So
Yeah.
that is, I think, hugely important. But the relationship you have with yourself, absolutely. And then you can explore that even deeper and say the relationship you had with your parents, because in many cases we do project some of those needs onto the other person, and that again causes a lot of suffering that could be dealt with, and that is often unnecessary.
And that's sort of like that sort of inner child who may be carrying around some trauma from, be it abuse or perceived abuse, thinking of Gabor Mate's kind of view on
Yes,
things.
absolutely. Yeah.
And no one's going to be able to heal that except you, like on your own. So,
Yeah.
now just a kind of a different perspective on that, not necessarily polyamory, but a related concept. Just recently was talking to somebody who's into this, is ethical non-monogamy. And so the way that she was describing this, she has also been dating for a long, doing online dating thing for a long time, and just coming to a point where going, I keep looking for that one person who's going to meet all my needs as in a partner, and maybe that's my mistake. So she's kind of going to trying this ethical non-monogamy to kind of parcel out her needs, so maybe she can meet one person where the desire part is strong, and she can, I know you want to make that all part of one thing, but maybe you come to a point where you're like, I'm just not having that, like it's just not on offer. So it's like, yeah, I'm a sexual being, I still want to have sex, but I may not, but am I going to just have to wait for that meaningful relationship for the rest of my life? And then I also want to have, this connection that's awesome over here. And it's like, maybe it's a mistake to try to find it in one person. And if everybody's being very honest, then, it's like, yeah, I like you like 2 days a month. I like you in small doses. I like you because you do that one thing. And then I like this other one because they do that other thing. And I slowly pull together a life.
But that's not a relationship. That is like, trying to get the most out of it. I don't see the give and take there. I don't see the compromise of that. And when you're looking for the perfect person, you will never find them. And that is just something that we have. And you don't actually want that, because what makes it interesting, that relationship with another person, is that there is friction, there are flaws, and so on. So that is also important that's how you grow, and talking about growth and trying to overcome them to the degree, and working together and kind of working as a team. And I don't like the sport analogy so much, but I like the idea of it, and to see yourself as a unity. And when you are just looking for something, I want this and this, it's like, a catalog, and you say, okay, I'm going to shop this, I want this color and I want that. And it's not, you can't do that with another human being, I think. So I think it's just that lack of understanding of what is it you really want in that case. And we're dealing with another human being.
For it forever.
Hmm?
And then hold out for it Hold
No,
out
I
for that.
wouldn't. I wouldn't hold out. I would just try out and then say, okay, being realistic, does that work? What does my gut feeling tell me? Is this something I want to pursue? Does it satisfy my needs? But then also thinking of the other person, right? It's not just about your own needs at that point. So we should not forget that. It's like you're dealing with another person who has their own mind and own feelings and their own experiences. So it's complicated. I think definitely it's quite complicated. It takes a lot of work. But I do believe in people like soulmates. But I don't think if you meet your soulmate, it's gonna be solved and you're gonna be happily living happily ever after. I think once you have that, then the real work also begins of like, okay, we have to make sure we have communication, we have presence, we deal with situations, and kind of that unity grows and you become more bonded to the other person, more bound to the other person. And that is a sign of freedom for me, ironically, because then that kind of identification with the other person, we've gone through things together, we've dealt with this, right? And that's I think that's hugely important.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. And so, but like, if you were single, and
Mhm.
would would you hold out for that, or would casual sex be a part of your dating life?
Hypothetically speaking, I think it just, you just have to see. I think you'd have to try out things too. I mean, I think that's kind of necessary and that's part of it. And being open to some experiences, I wouldn't just say, okay, I would just wait or for things to happen, or I would just like refuse others until I meet the person who's perfect. I think you do have to take a jump here and there and make mistakes and choose the wrong people and from to learn from it. So I would say holding out, not necessarily. Once you know what you want, once you feel comfortable with yourself, go out and date. And
Yeah,
that's something I think I haven't done enough when I was younger because I was kind of afraid of that, or I was looking for somebody who would meet those requirements. And I think that's a mistake. I would say, no, just go ahead, date, find out when you're again at a certain stage of your life, and then decide what is it you want, or at any stage of your life. It can happen at any point. And being open to others, not just necessarily holding out or just waiting. I think that you're missing out on certain experiences that way,
yeah,
good and bad, right? I think the bad experiences are probably better in this situation because that helps you to see things in a different way.
yeah, yeah. I agree. Again, it's a fine balance, I think. And I dated somebody a little while ago, and they had been quite, like, they had a kind of ethical non-monogamy thing going with like a bunch of people there for a while. And then when we were, I mean, didn't date very long, but when we were dating, it was because of COVID or whatever, just it was exclusive for a short amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
But it sort of all made sense, it's sort of like her, having several partners before, and then she was also into having threesomes, so she was doing that, and then she wasn't doing that, and then what I sensed, and she seemed in this way very healthy, she sort of accepted the default of being alone, like, because we ultimately are living this life, as one person, and we are with somebody. And even when we're with them, there are times when we are a little bit apart from them. There's always fluctuations. People come and go from our lives. So the default is it's you, and you. I think the key is you have to be okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yes.
And I feel like that's the struggle too. And I think, even from a media perspective, it's always the couples that are celebrated, and anybody single is in a place of lack, where it's like, what are you doing to get into a relationship? Like, you're out there, you're not living life, your life is lived only when you are with somebody else. Whereas really we're all going to feel alone sometimes, even if you're married or whatever. and they're just going to that. So I feel like that has to be like, should be more like celebrated, where it's like, it's fine, you know, like.
I think it's fine, of course, if that is again something that you want and you're fine with, absolutely. But I think it's also like the idea. It's like when you have a marriage or you have a family, that it is just wonderful, and it is to for some and to many and at various points. But it's not, again, that idea of perfection is not really true, and you have to get inside the room and the situations, and to figure out how difficult it is at times, right? And we've seen it with relationships too that looked fine, they seemed happy, this happy family, and then you hear that there's divorce, they're breaking up, there are many complications there. So we have to be aware that whether you are alone, single, or in a relationship, or have a family, it doesn't guarantee that you are necessarily happy or that is the best thing for you. And so I would say it's nothing comes easy, but that's the good thing because it takes effort. And many people have the perception it's like, okay, now that I'm married, now that I have my family, I don't have to do anything. That's it. Here we go. Everything is like smooth sailing. And no, it's not, right? And so I think that's what the media does too, is presenting something as the ideal, but it doesn't look at it realistically, right?
Yeah.
So, and we
Yeah,
see
and
that
I think
with
that's right.
works of art, just works of art. We see, oh, this person is a genius, or they created this movie, or they created this painting. But then when you look at the lives, like how much effort it took them to get there, we don't have overnight successes. That doesn't exist. It's people who work all their lives and then they finally get a break. So I think that's how we should see it too, not just a genius. Geniuses have to work. And we watched the series on Einstein, like how much he was constantly like working and nonstop thinking, and a movie of Picasso had lots of women, and he painted and tried this and struggled and had to work. And we don't see that often. We just say, oh, you're a genius. There you go. Another painting done. No, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, like Louis C.K. I know mentioned like when he started getting really popular and famous, people would be like the overnight success, and he would say, yeah, like the overnight success that took 10 years, you know,
Exactly.
times that he had to sleep in his car, and you know the many years that he
Yes.
just sucked, like he just
Mhm,
was the
mhm.
worst comedian
But
doing
we
like
don't talk
corporate
about that. We don't see that. You know, we
and
don't have
nobody's
access
laughing.
to that.
Yeah,
I loved it when George Harrison, they said, oh, wait, there's a comeback album for him. And it's like, what do you mean comeback? I've always been here. I didn't go away. I've been making records and albums, but now you're finally giving me some credit for it, or it's successful and popular. Good, but I haven't stopped working. And I think and again, that element of work, it's not the most romantic thing to say, but this is how relationships work. I think it's not, you meet somebody and everything is fine, and movies end at that point, but we have to also see what comes after. So just in terms of online dating, I want to ask again, finally, one question. We probably talked about this, but what is some advice you would give to people? What are some red flags? What are some pitfalls? What should we watch out for? And how can we find out that this could work? What is your experience there, or your feeling about this?
I think I'll just say this about, well, I'll say more than that, but I'll say, you know, I always felt like online dating in the abstract should have worked, should be like great, like, because it seems so efficient, right? Like,
Mhm.
what's the alternative? You know, waiting for happenstance, you know, through your friends, go to a bar, like you just don't have that. You have such a limited pool of options that way, right? Whereas here you can just scroll through infinite number of profiles. You have all of the key information you need to at least, you know, kind of get started. And yet people, you know, for most people, it's a very frustrating experience, right? And I think one of the things is that there kind of isn't enough information you know, in a profile, and you know, you can sort of assume that whatever, and I guess the human mind fills in the gaps so quickly, like we're so
Mhm.
quick
Mhm.
to kind of
Yes.
project, even if we have pictures and whatever. And then photos themselves, not that anyone, I mean, some people are trying to be deceptive, but it's like they don't, they can be deceptive inadvertently. I think
Mhm.
one mistake that people do is they'll have this awesome picture that they just look fantastic, but it's kind of a trick of the light. And then the biggest, this one I totally don't understand. A lot of women will apply a photo filter to completely remove every wrinkle so that they look smooth as a Barbie doll, even though they're 51 years old, right? And so it's like we when we meet, I'm pretty sure the photo filter is not going to be working anymore. You know what I mean? Like, and so it's pretty easy to see, because when you do see this, like when there's like no like change in the skin, is just like completely flat. But people can also be subtle with it. But it's like it's not, and I know it's sort of to try to attract that mate, you know, initially, and then hopefully there'll be something later. But it's very jarring to see somebody's face that looks very, you know, maybe 10 years younger because of that. And then you meet them in person and you're just like, did you send your mom? Like, you know, like, so that's a one red flag for me, is like very, very super clean sort of skin. And whatever the pictures are, it's like, yeah, you'll get a general idea, but don't put too much stock in it, you know, because it could be old, whatever. It could be just people look different in different lights and whatever. And make no assumptions, you know, like just, and so whatever they may seem like, that's cool. That's a starting point. But yeah, like do a little texting, whatever. The other one for me is like, don't let the texting go on too long, because again, the projections and the fantasies begin, you know, and it's like, so
Mhm.
that's another,
That's a good
I've
point.
made that mistake where I've literally exchanged emails with people for 3 months. Like I was dating other people too, but it was like for some reason we weren't meeting. And we got so into these emails, and again they seemed so fantastic. And then as soon as we met, we're like, oh no, it was like,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
chemistry wasn't there, right?
Mhm.
And so, you know, have a little bit of background before you meet someone. Don't just like show up and hello, but just sort of don't let it go on too long. And I don't know, for me, I just like to give people a chance, you know, like I have a friend who's very like, they she's always like, they must like this type of music, they must, you know, share
Mhm.
all of these
Mhm.
interests, or I'm not even gonna start.
But
And
if it's important to them, okay. But it makes it so much harder too to find another person that fits all those requirements. But if you say like, I want somebody who loves pets because you do have a pet and they don't, so if that's important to you, I think yes, that could be important for that person, right? But not to make it that limiting that there's only like a couple of people in the world that would meet those requirements. Absolutely. And there are other
well,
things that are probably more important than the ones we think as requirements.
yeah, and I always want to be open to that sort of unlikely connection, you know, like
Mhm, mhm,
the heart wants what the heart wants. And I think we can sometimes connect with people across, I mean, that's where the Japan element came in, where you can connect with people across a cultural divide, across, you know, like, oh, that's so weird, like I don't share your musical tastes or whatever your tastes. um and yet maybe there's something there, like maybe you'll connect on some other level that you're not even thinking about, and something else in you will come out. And it's like, I don't, so I've done that a lot, and I feel like sometimes I've done it too much, because I end up just going, oh yeah, right, we don't actually share any the interest beyond, and then it gets a little bit lost in that euphoria of desire and all of that kind of stuff. And I've made that mistake many times. um and The other thing is, what I'm really taking to heart is the advice: don't chase, you know, like don't, like, there's nothing, and I do this, I tend to get into seduction mode as soon as I'm sort of connected, or I'm not, there comes a point where I'm not really even thinking whether I want them or not. I'm just thinking about how to get them. You know what I mean? Like,
mhm,
it's just
mhm,
like something sort of flips over in my mind, and
mhm.
I'm like, this is a project now. And and then it's like, if it doesn't, and it'll work to a certain extent, but it's going to set a precedent for your entire relationship, where you are the chaser, you are the seducer, and they're kind of sitting back going, what do you got for me today? And it's much better. You say hi, initiate contact, but you're kind of inviting somebody to your life. You're like, hey, my life is awesome. I like me. I like these things. I'm just curious about you. And if you want to, check me out and join me here, awesome. But don't go to them. You know what I mean? Like, don't be like, I want to be part of your thing because your thing looks way better than my thing. Like,
Yeah.
and that's really the only way that you'll be able to attract people anyway, right? Like, if you can sort of sit back and go, like, yeah, I'm very content in myself. And they're like, oh, really? Now I'm curious. So,
and often it doesn't come out in words. It's just like you show it to the other person. They see it, they sense it, and it's like, oh, what's his secret or what's her secret, and so on. And I think that is attractive. And of course, the sense of humor and being confident and all those things I find quite attractive too. And so once you can show that, then the other person is just naturally curious. It's like, I want to find out more about this person.
Yeah.
Wonderful discussion. Thank you so much, Chris, for being here. This is the Chris and Arash show, and we talked about relationships. I think there was tons of stuff that we covered, tons of stuff that was new to me, maybe some stuff that was new to you as well. And thank you very much for being here, and look forward to our next chat.